Hey there, YouTube folks. Welcome to another video. And in today's video, we're going to see something that's almost unbelievable. A match I've always wanted to see in my life. Magnus Carlsen versus Stockfish. That's right, this didn't happen by chance. Okay, guys, let me explain the story to you. Magnus Carlsen was playing in the Bunter Blitz on Chess24, that event, that live stream where he plays with the member users. However, one of the members had the audacity to use Stockfish against the current world champion. Of course, it was cheating. Magnus Carlsen definitely didn't know it was Stockfish at the time, but by the end of the video, he was already very suspicious of it. In fact, this video was released on the Chess24 channel itself, and the title of the video was Cheater Uses Stockfish Against Magnus. However, anyway, this game here is very interesting. It's a game I've always wanted to see. Magnus Carlsen playing against one of the strongest chess computers in the world, Stockfish. It was a 5-minute game, and I hope you're as curious as I am to see this great chess match. It's really interesting, right? So, let's get straight to this game now. So guys, here we are. And playing white was Magnus Carlsen, and playing black was Alexander K with a rating of 2,118s. However, it's not really him, because here, playing black, we have Stockfish, that's right. And at the end, I'll show the report for this game, okay guys? And it will be very clear that it really was Stockfish, a super strong engine. And Magnus, since he was playing white, started here with knight to f3, and let's see how this extraordinary game went. f5 was played here by black, and Magnus then plays d3, and after knight f6, Magnus goes for a very interesting line. Here with e4 sacrificing a pawn. Then came the capture on e4d, takes e4, and knight takes e4. In this position, Magnus gains a tempo of bishop development by attacking the knight on e4. If black just retreats the knight, white is making a significant gambit. But that's not what the supposed Stockfish did. Stockfish played d5, then Magnus captured on e4, and d takes e4 followed. And the queen exchange. In fact, in this move, when Magnus captures on e4, he's a bit surprised. That's because his opponent hadn't made a pre-move. His opponent thought for about 2 to 3 seconds before capturing the queen here. In other words, this already indicates that his opponent was consulting the engine, but of course, in the game report, this will become very clear. Black took on d8 here, and now came knight g5, played by the world champion, which brings the idea of entering on f7. Stockfish isn't foolish. It plays king e8 to defend, and Magnus didn't take immediately. He developed another piece to capture the e4 pawn and will eventually recover it. Black played bishop f5, then bishop f4 followed. Magnus can take on e4 later, but now threatens c7. He develops another piece, which makes sense. Black played knight to c6 here, the great Stockfish, and in this position, Magnus castled queenside. Continuing the development, he doesn't capture the pawns. He could have taken on c7 if he wanted to, but he didn't do that. He kept developing his pieces. Black in this position, they played e5, attacking the bishop on f4, which retreats to d3. The game continues with bishop e7, targeting the knight on g5. Now Magnus moves his knight from g to capture the e4 pawn. Black, in this position, offers the exchange of rooks, and Magnus, he doesn't exchange the rooks. He keeps playing f3, fixing a super Pegasus on e4. Here, black moves the knight to d4, which is already a very strong move, right? Because it puts the knight on an advanced post. And it's not so interesting for white to give up the bishop here, right? Because there could be a pawn or rook capture coming, and white will end up. Keeping both bishops isn't very good for white strategically. Because of that, Magnus brings the rook from h to e1, putting the rook right in front of the king, right? There's some contact, and also attacking the e5 pawn, and here black moves the king to f7. The most positional move connecting the rooks here, so in this position, Magnus continues playing with rook to d2. This is an interesting move because notice how we start to realize we're playing against the engine since our moves become very limited. For example, a natural move here for white could be knight to g3 to put pressure on the bishop. but this move isn't possible because the pawn on c6 would fall. So all of black's pieces start to make sense where they are, and it's very hard to play. So Magnus played rook to d2 here, precisely to prepare the defense at the c2 square. He can also move that knight eventually, and might be threatening to double up on the d-file. The game continues with h6, another logical move by black to prevent jumps. Here on g5, it's defending the g5 square. And in this position, Magnus plays knight f2, a very clever move, because he's preparing to bring the knight to d3 to put pressure on the e5 point or something along those lines. And as black in this position played bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3, and now Magnus plays with the knight to d3. So he attacks the bishop and also attacks the pawn on e5. And in this position, black, or the supposed Stockfish, captures the knight on d3, then comes the rook capture, and now the knight. Black played knight to c6, one of the strongest moves in this position. The knight on d4 was already threatened and setting up a fork. The knight goes back, defends the e5 square, and the game continues. In this position, Magnus doubles his rooks on the d-file, leading to black simplifying there. Rook takes d3 was played, followed by bishop takes c3. A very strong move as well, which brings the idea of diverting the rook from the d-file. Because white doesn't want to capture with the b-pawn, right? Because it ends up breaking the structure. Magnus takes with the rook, followed by a 5. Magnus begins targeting black's weakest pawns here, right? Surprisingly, the position is balanced. So, of course, Magnus is playing here against Stockfish. Reaching move 22 in the game with the match still even isn't something most people can do, right? I definitely think Magnus is the best chess player. The game continues with rook to b3 attacking the b7 pawn. Black defends with rook to b8 followed by a4. Magnus prevents black from advancing their pawns recklessly on the queen side. The game continues as king moves to e6. Stockfish moves his king to the center, and Magnus follows with king to d2, bringing his king into play too. Because, in the end, we know that the king makes all the difference in the world. g5 was played here by Stockfish, expanding the pawns on the king side. King to e2 was then played by Magnus, and now b6. In other words, black is now making the rook available to play again, since it no longer needs to defend the pawn on b7. The pawn is already safe, and Magnus plays rook to c3. He attacks the knight, and if the knight moves, the pawn on c7 will fall. And now, black plays king to d5, which is another one of those super logical moves. He activates. The king defends the knight and occupies an active square. In the game, in this position, Magnus played bishop e3 here, rook a8. So, black's idea now is to break with e4, which could be a problem. Magnus counters this idea with rook c4 defending here. And there could even be plans with h4 coming as well. Here, knight d4 was played, one of the strongest and most annoying moves in this position. In this position, Magnus then plays king d3, which is also a difficult move to make, right? Bringing the king up close here. The rook seems trapped. This is a bit confusing. And in this position comes c5, and now it looks like white is. It looks like, right? They're getting a bit locked up here because the rook is really limited in this position, and it's not easy to play this. So Magnus played c3 here to move the knight and let the rook have a bit more mobility, although it only has the d4 square Magnus. At this moment, he mentions that one of his ideas, as soon as the knight moves, could be to play h4. However, Stockfish doesn't allow that and plays here with the knight to f5, which specifically defends against the idea of h4. The opponent is always a move ahead, constantly restricting in this position. Magnus played bishop to f2 here. Since this is a 5-minute game, time gets tight here, and Magnus had more time than his opponent. Because if his opponent is really using Stockfish, then you end up spending a bit more time because you have to check the source where you're using the engine. So after bishop f2, the move knight 6 came, and now rook g4. One of white's ideas here is to play h4. At some point, king 6 was played, then h4, rook d8, and after king e2. Here, the supposed Stockfish ran out of time. But anyway, 35 moves in a game here still balanced. A game where white still has their chances. Here, in this position, however, what surprised me the most was, besides Magnus reaching this position playing against the strongest engine in the world, it's possible that Magnus could even manage to draw this position if the game continued, which is amazing because he's playing a 5-minute game against a very strong engine. And for sure, he's making moves here as if it were a classical game. And it was a draw. I mean, was it a draw? Magnus won this on time. He flagged Stockfish, and now let's see the report of this game, in case you're wondering whether it was really Stockfish or not. Let's go to the report now to check this out. So, guys, look at the report. This is something surprising in my opinion, something unimaginable. Look at the accuracy of both. Magnus managed to be more accurate than the engine his opponent was using, the supposed Stockfish. So, Magnus had an incredible 99.2 accuracy. It almost seems like Magnus is using the engine, right? But he's the world champion, and it was live in full color. This accuracy here is real from Magnus, and black here with 99.1 accuracy and extremely high accuracy. Also, we can see here in the move report that Magnus didn't have any inaccuracies, any mistakes, any blunders, or any missed wins. The evaluation in this report comes directly from Stockfish. So Stockfish finds an inaccuracy in black's move. In other words, Stockfish finds an inaccuracy in its own game, which is even stranger. And many best moves, excellent moves, good moves, and book moves. So this result here makes it very clear that Magnus's opponent was using some kind of assistance. Extra, some engine, because Magnus's opponent's rating was 2,118. The game became confusing at times. So it's pretty clear that it really was a computer there, playing against the world champion. But as is part of life, he signaled. Against Stockfish, Magnus ran down Stockfish's clock. But anyway, it's a very interesting game. It's a shame we couldn't see more moves until the end of the game. It's a shame time ran out earlier because the game was very interesting. And I think Magnus would really have drawn with Stockfish. That position, if time hadn't run out, but we'll always have that doubt, right? Right, guys? So, guys, I hope you enjoyed this very curious game. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a big like down below because it really helps the channel grow. See you in the next videos. Guys, thank you. And what's up?